You know that feeling when you're sitting with your closest friends, but somehow feel like you're speaking a completely different language? They're laughing at the same jokes, but something fundamental has shifted. You care about them deeply, but you can't shake the sense that you're living in entirely different worlds now. If you're an INFJ, you've probably felt this weird disconnect, where relationships that once felt meaningful now feel almost suffocating. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. The assumption is that this happens because you're being emotional, or maybe you think you're better than everyone else. But that's not what's actually going on. The real reason INFJs outgrow people isn't emotional at all. It's cognitive. It's about how your brain processes patterns and information at a speed that most people can't match. By the end of this video, you'll understand the psychological mechanics behind why you can't seem to stay satisfied with the relationships that used to work. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The pattern recognition trap. Here's what most people don't understand about the INFJ mind. Your dominant cognitive function, introverted intuition, doesn't just observe life, it studies it obsessively. While someone else is having a casual conversation about weekend plans, your brain is already 3 steps ahead, reading between the lines, picking up contradictions, and mapping out where this entire dynamic is heading. This isn't conscious analysis. It's happening automatically in the background, like a supercomputer running pattern recognition software. You're not trying to be analytical. You just can't help but see the trajectory of every situation, every relationship, every conversation before it actually plays out. Think of it this way. Most people experience life linearly. Event happens, they react, they learn a lesson, they move forward. But your brain processes life holographically. You don't just experience the moment, you see all the possible outcomes of that moment simultaneously. You understand not just what someone is saying, but why they're saying it, what they're avoiding, and where this entire interaction is likely to lead. This creates an invisible problem. Once your brain has solved the pattern of a relationship or social circle, you start feeling restless. It's like reading a book you've already finished, or watching a movie when you already know how it ends. The predictability becomes cognitively uncomfortable. Mapping the pattern is only the first phase. Now this next part is where things get interesting, because it explains why you feel physically exhausted even when you're just sitting still. Your friends are still trying to figure out dynamics you mapped out months ago. They're having revelations about people you've already completely understood. They're excited about possibilities you've already mentally explored and dismissed. The gap between processing speeds creates a kind of intellectual loneliness that's hard to explain. But here's where it gets really tricky. Because you care about these people, you try to stay engaged. You try to act surprised when they discover things you already knew. You try to seem interested in conversations you've already mentally concluded. But your brain won't let you fake it for long. The exhaustion isn't emotional, it's cognitive. You're constantly having to slow down your mental processing to match everyone else's pace. It's like being a race car driver forced to cruise in the slow lane. Technically, you can do it, but it feels unnatural and draining. This is why INFJs often feel like they're living conversations they've already had. Your intuition has already run through every possible variation of the discussion. You know how your friend will react when you bring up that sensitive topic. You can predict exactly how your family member will respond to your news. You've already experienced the entire emotional arc of situations that haven't even happened yet. The trap is that you start feeling guilty about this. You think maybe you're being judgmental or impatient. You wonder if there's something wrong with you for not being satisfied with relationships that seem to work fine for everyone else. But the truth is, your brain is wired differently. It's not a character flaw, it's a cognitive difference. Most people can have the same conversation multiple times and find it fulfilling each time. But once your pattern recognition has categorized someone's communication style, their defense mechanisms, and their typical responses, staying in that loop becomes mentally stifling. You need novelty, complexity, and growth to feel intellectually alive. This is why INFJs often describe feeling like they're suffocating in relationships that look perfectly healthy from the outside. It's not that the other person is doing anything wrong. It's that your brain has already extracted all the learning it can from that dynamic and is ready to move on to more complex challenges. The cognitive discomfort of staying in solved patterns is what drives the outgrowing process. It's not about emotions or superiority. It's about mental stimulation and continued growth. Your brain literally needs more complexity to function optimally. We've all worn the mask, but there is a specific breaking point that every INFJ eventually hits. Now, everything I've just told you will not work if you don't know this next step. This step will literally determine whether you grow or spiral into burnout. The authenticity shift. Now let's talk about what happens when an INFJ decides to stop performing. Because here's the thing most people don't realize about INFJs. You've probably spent years, maybe decades, carefully crafting versions of yourself that work in different social situations. You learned early on that your natural intensity, your depth, your need for meaning, made other people uncomfortable. So you developed what psychologists call a false self. Not because you're manipulative, but because you're empathetic. You genuinely wanted to make others feel comfortable around you. You learned to dial down your complexity to match whatever social environment you were in. You became a master chameleon, shifting your personality to fit the group dynamic. This masking ability is actually a survival mechanism. It allowed you to maintain relationships and navigate social situations that would have been impossible if you showed up as your full, authentic self. But there's a psychological cost to this constant performance that builds up over time. The breaking point usually comes during a period of significant personal growth. Maybe it's therapy. Maybe it's a spiritual awakening. Maybe it's just the natural process of getting older and caring less about what other people think. Whatever triggers it, you reach a point where maintaining the false self becomes more exhausting than the fear of being rejected for who you really are. When an INFJ commits to authenticity, everything changes. You stop automatically adjusting your personality to make others comfortable. You start expressing opinions you used to keep to yourself. You become willing to be weird, unconventional, and unapologetically complex. You stop pretending to care about things that don't actually matter to you. But here's what creates the relationship crisis. Most of your existing friendships were built on the foundation of your performance. People fell in love with the carefully curated version of you that you presented to the world. They got comfortable with your mask, not your face. When you drop the performance, it doesn't just change how you show up. It changes how you perceive everyone else. Suddenly, you become hyper-aware of all the ways other people are performing too. You start noticing the masks they wear, the roles they play, the carefully constructed versions of themselves they present in social situations. This awareness isn't judgmental. It's just unavoidable. Once you've committed to authenticity, you can feel when someone else is being inauthentic. You notice the gap between who they really are and who they're pretending to be. And that gap makes genuine connection impossible. Most friendships operate on a level of mutual performance. Everyone agrees to play slightly modified versions of themselves that work well together socially. It's not necessarily dishonest. It's just how social groups maintain harmony. But once you stop playing that game, those friendships suddenly feel hollow. Your friends might not even realize what's changed. From their perspective, you've become more difficult, more intense, maybe even more selfish. They miss the version of you that was easier to be around. They want their friend back. But that friend was never real to begin with. It feels like a betrayal, doesn't it? But there's a reason your brain actually needs this conflict to happen. I'll show you why. That friction is actually a sign of health in just a moment. The authenticity shift creates a kind of loneliness that's hard to explain. You're finally being yourself, but the people who claim to love you are grieving the person you used to pretend to be. It feels like being punished for finally telling the truth about who you are. This is where the outgrowing really accelerates. Because once you've tasted authenticity, you can't go back to performing. The psychological relief of finally being yourself is too powerful. Even if it means losing relationships that were important to you, staying true to yourself becomes non-negotiable. The friends who can handle your authenticity will stick around, and the relationships will actually become deeper and more meaningful. But the friends who were only comfortable with your mask will naturally drift away. It's not personal. It's just incompatible operating systems. If you think your values are stable, you're missing the most powerful part of the INFJ engine. This next detail changes everything about how you plan your future. The values evolution cycle. Here's where the psychological mechanics get really interesting. INFJs don't just grow, they completely restructure their entire worldview on a regular basis. What seemed absolutely crucial at 20 feels trivial at 25. What felt important at 30 seems almost laughable by 35. This isn't fickleness. It's how your brain processes new information and integrates it into your understanding of reality. Most people develop a set of values in their teens or early 20s, and then spend the rest of their lives defending those values. They might make small adjustments, but the core framework stays relatively stable. INFJs operate completely differently. Every new piece of information, every meaningful experience, every insight has the potential to completely reorganize how you see the world. This happens because of how introverted intuition works with your auxiliary function, extroverted feeling. NI is constantly collecting data and looking for deeper patterns, while FE is evaluating how those patterns affect human well-being and meaning. When these two functions work together, they create a feedback loop that's always refining and updating your value system. Let's say you spend your early 20s focused on career success, climbing the ladder, accumulating achievements. Then you have an experience, maybe a health scare or a period of depression, that shows you how empty that pursuit actually was. Most people might adjust their work-life balance, but keep the same basic goals. An INFJ will often completely abandon the entire framework of conventional success and rebuild their life around entirely different principles. This value evolution creates a specific type of relationship problem. While you're completely rewiring your understanding of what makes life meaningful, your old friends are still operating from the same value system they've always had. They're still chasing career advancement, status accumulation, fitting in with social expectations, things that used to matter to you too. The disconnect becomes obvious in everyday conversations. They're excited about promotions you no longer care about. They're stressed about social situations that seem pointless to you now. They're investing energy in goals that feel hollow based on what you've learned about yourself and life in general. You can't judge them for it because you understand. You used to want those things too. You remember when those achievements felt important, when that kind of recognition mattered. But you can't pretend to want them anymore. The enthusiasm would be completely fake, and everyone would feel it. This is where the guilt really kicks in. You start feeling like maybe you're being pretentious or judgmental. Maybe you're wrong to have moved beyond caring about things that still matter to people you love. Maybe you should try harder to reconnect with your old priorities to maintain these relationships. But here's what's actually happening psychologically. Your brain has integrated new information about what creates genuine fulfillment versus what creates temporary satisfaction. Once you've learned the difference between authentic meaning and social validation, you can't unsee it. Trying to go backward would be like trying to believe in Santa Claus again after you've learned the truth. The values evolution cycle means you're constantly becoming incompatible with previous versions of yourself. And since most relationships are built on shared values and common goals, this creates natural selection in your social circle. The people who are evolving in similar directions will stay connected to you. The people who are staying static or evolving in different directions will gradually become strangers. This is the trap that keeps INFJs stuck for decades. Now, this next part is where things get interesting and a little uncomfortable. What makes this particularly challenging for INFJs is that you often feel like you should be able to maintain relationships across value differences. Your empathy makes you want to understand and accept people who are in different places. But understanding someone doesn't mean you can build a meaningful connection with them if your core values no longer align. The psychological reality is that shared values aren't just nice to have in relationships. They're essential for genuine connection. When your values shift dramatically and someone else's stay the same, you're literally speaking different languages, even when you're using the same words. What they call success, you might call compromise. What you call growth, they might call instability. This values evolution cycle is why INFJs often go through multiple, complete friendship overhauls throughout their lives. It's not that you're incapable of maintaining long-term relationships. It's that you're incapable of maintaining relationships that no longer serve your psychological development. The outgrowing isn't personal, it's developmental. The potential versus reality collapse. Here's where INFJs get themselves into the most psychological trouble. Your dominant function, introverted intuition, doesn't just see patterns in what is, it sees patterns in what could be. When you look at people, you don't just see who they are right now, you see who they have the potential to become. This ability to envision human potential is one of your greatest gifts, but it's also a curse in relationships. An INFJ might stay in a friendship or romantic relationship for years, based not on the current reality of who that person is, but on the vision of who they could become. You see their talents they're not using, their emotional intelligence, they're not developing their capacity for growth, they're ignoring. You genuinely believe that if they just did the inner work, if they just faced their patterns, if they just committed to evolving, they could transform into someone extraordinary. This isn't wishful thinking. It's pattern recognition. Your brain is actually very good at identifying untapped potential in people. You can see the gap between who someone is and who they're capable of being. The problem is that seeing potential doesn't mean that person wants to actualize it. Some people are genuinely content with who they are right now. Some people have different priorities than personal development. Some people aren't interested in the kind of psychological growth that feels essential to you. But because your intuition is so accurate about potential, you keep investing hope and energy into people becoming better versions of themselves. You make excuses for their current limitations because you can see so clearly what they're capable of. You stay patient with behaviors that frustrate you because you believe they're temporary. You continue showing up for someone based on who they might become, rather than who they actually are. This creates a specific type of psychological trap. You're essentially in a relationship with a fantasy. The person you're investing in exists more in your mind than in reality. You're loving their potential, not their actuality. You're building expectations based on your vision of their growth, rather than their demonstrated patterns of behavior. The breaking point comes when you finally accept that potential means nothing without action. You realize you've been waiting for someone to become who they've shown no genuine interest in becoming. You've been hoping for changes they've never actually committed to making. You've been patient with patterns they've shown no real motivation to break. This realization is devastating because it means the entire relationship was built on something that was never real. The connection you thought you had was actually a connection to your own projection. The person you fell in love with as a friend or partner was largely a creation of your own intuitive imagination. When INFJs finally accept this reality, it often triggers what looks like sudden coldness or detachment. People don't understand how you can go from being so invested in someone to seeming like you don't care about them at all. But what's actually happening is that you're grieving the death of the fantasy version of that person you've been carrying around. You're not leaving the actual person you're leaving, your projection of who they could have been. You're not giving up on them. You're giving up on the version of them that only existed in your mind. This distinction is crucial because it explains why the departure often feels so final and non-negotiable. Once an INFJ recognizes that they've been in love with potential rather than reality, they become much more cautious about making that mistake again. They start paying more attention to people's actual choices rather than their stated intentions. They start valuing consistency over possibility. They start building relationships based on who people demonstrate themselves to be, rather than who they claim they want to become. This shift from potential-based relationships to reality-based relationships is another major factor in the outgrowing process. It's not that you stop caring about people's growth. It's that you stop making their potential growth a requirement for your continued investment. You start accepting people exactly as they are right now, and making relationship decisions based on that acceptance. The psychological relief of finally relating to people based on reality rather than projection is enormous. But it also means that many relationships that were built on the foundation of unrealized potential suddenly have nothing left to stand on. You might feel alone right now, but there is a final phase of this evolution that most INFJs never reach because they get stuck in the guilt. This next step will literally unlock the deep connection you've been searching for. The cognitive loneliness phenomenon. Here's the paradox that most people don't understand about high emotional intelligence. The better you get at reading people, understanding their motivations, and seeing their patterns, the lonelier you become. It's like developing superhuman hearing and then realizing you can hear every conversation in the building, even the ones you don't want to hear. When an INFJ does years of inner work, therapy, self-reflection, reading about psychology, they develop a level of emotional intelligence that most people never reach. You understand your own triggers clearly. You can see your defense mechanisms operating in real time. You can predict how people will react in specific situations because you understand human nature at such a deep level. But there's a dark side to this awareness. The more conscious you become, the harder it is to be around people who haven't done that same work. You see their blind spots so clearly. You understand exactly why they're struggling in ways they can't recognize themselves. You watch them make the same mistakes repeatedly, unable to learn from their own patterns. It's like becoming fluent in a language that nobody else speaks. You can see the subtext in every conversation. You notice the defense mechanisms people use to avoid uncomfortable truths. You recognize the stories they tell themselves to maintain their current identity. But you can't really talk to them about any of it because they're not ready to hear it. This creates a specific type of isolation. You're surrounded by people, but you're fundamentally alone because nobody else is operating at the same level of consciousness. They're running on autopilot, never questioning their own behavior, never examining their motivations, never looking at themselves with genuine honesty. The loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about being psychologically alone. You're the only person in the room who's awake in a particular way. Everyone else is sleepwalking through their patterns, and you can see it clearly. But pointing it out would only create conflict and defensiveness. This is why INFJs often feel like they're living in a different reality than everyone around them. You're operating from a completely different level of self-awareness. What seems obvious to you is invisible to them. What feels essential to you seems unnecessary to them. The gap between consciousness levels creates an unbridgeable communication barrier. The cruel irony is that the very thing that makes you good at understanding people, emotional intelligence, also makes it harder to connect with them. You see too much. You understand too deeply. You recognize patterns they can't see in themselves. This knowledge becomes a wall between you and authentic connection. Finding people who operate at your level of consciousness becomes essential, not just for friendship, but for psychological survival. You need people who have done their own inner work, who can engage in conversations about patterns and motivations, who understand the complexity of human behavior. Without these connections, the loneliness becomes overwhelming. So that's the real reason INFJs outgrow everyone. It's not emotional, it's cognitive. Your brain processes patterns faster, sees potential more clearly, and demands authenticity more intensely than most people can handle. The outgrowing isn't about superiority. It's about psychological survival. Yes, it's lonely sometimes, but it's also necessary. Staying in relationships that no longer serve your development would be like trying to fit back into clothes you've outgrown. Click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. And if you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.